During the height of the space race, the United States rushed to get astronauts to the moon ahead of the Soviet Union. This led to a lot of scientists and engineers pushing science and technology to its limit. Also, the extreme timetable also made things difficult for the crews and astronauts involved. On July 27, 1967, a test flight of the new Apollo spacecraft was underway. Astronauts Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and Virgil Grissom were preparing for a 14-day mission when a fire started in a crew capsule of their Apollo module, killing all 3 astronauts. Up to that point, it was the worst disaster in the history of NASA and almost killed the manned lunar program. This is the story of Apollo 1. Following the launch of the first satellite and the first man in space by the Soviets, the Americans were desperate to catch up. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy pledged to put Americans on the moon by the end of the 1960s. To accomplish this goal, the Apollo project was created. The Apollo project would test spacecraft meant for lunar environment, trips to the moon, and eventually landing on it. The Apollo program occurred in tandem with the Gemini manned missions. By the mid-1960s, NASA was ready to conduct manned test flights of the program. The Apollo modules were much more advanced than previous spacecraft. Engineers and astronauts raised concerns of the flammable material on the ship, such as Velcro. The 3 astronauts selected then posed for a picture of them praying in front of the model of the ship and mocking its flaws. With the end of the decade approaching, pressure to get to the moon was very high and the time was very short. This meant that some of the engineers and crews were overworked and pressured to keep schedule. On January 27, 1967, Apollo 1, or AS-204, was in the process of conducting a plug-out test. A plug-out test is when the spacecraft is running on internal power with no outside electrical cables attached to the ship. At 1:00 p.m., Grissom, Chaffee, and White all entered the capsule. Grissom noticed a mysterious smell coming from the capsule. He noted the smell was similar to sour buttermilk. The smell went away and the test continued. However, there were communication issues between the spacecraft and ground controllers. At one point, an annoyed Grissom could be heard saying, "How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 2 buildings?" The communication problems were fixed and the test continued. While the crew were going through a flight checklist, there was a sudden jump in electrical current, and with a flash noticed by some witnesses, a fire was reported. Radio recordings heard Grissom reporting a fire. The transmission lasted 5 seconds. The pyroxene of the capsule had made the fire very destructive, and it was feared that the fire could cause the Saturn 1B rocket to explode and destroy the launch pad. The intensity of the fire consumed all oxygen, but dissipated soon after. It took crews 5 minutes to open the door, in which they found all 3 astronauts dead and the capsule interior destroyed. Fellow astronaut Donald Deke Slayton was the first to survey the aftermath. Many of the bodies were burned beyond recognition and attached to their harnesses, which were melted to their seats. The insides were melted due to the intense heat damage. It was the worst disaster to affect NASA, and many thought that it could ruin Americans' chances of getting to the moon before the Russians. The cause of the fire was never been fully determined, but some believe that faulty wiring was responsible. Many of the astronauts were burned beyond recognition and suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Investigators deduced several reasons for the fire, including the use of flammable materials, difficulty in getting the hatch open in time to get the astronauts out, and the poor emergency procedures. The hatch was particularly scrutinized as it was a plug door design which under pressure differences used to seal itself. The fire had generated so much force that the hatch could not be opened quickly, trapping the astronauts inside. NASA had opted to use a hatch with explosive bolts in which the hatch could explode outwards if there was an emergency, but this was ignored because NASA engineers thought that the hatch would open by accident. Emergency procedures were also inadequate to deal with the fire. All Apollo capsules were redesigned, and the project was soon put back on schedule.